You know that moment when your entire life crumbles before your eyes and you realize everything you believed was a lie? That's exactly what happened to Marina when she opened the hotel room door and saw a scene that would shatter any heart. Her husband, Eduardo, the man with whom she had built 15 years of marriage, was in the arms of Lívia, her best friend since college. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was the complete destruction of everything she held sacred. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, but realizing from the knowing glances between them that it had been going on for years. That she had been made a fool of while smiling in family photos and celebrating wedding anniversaries. Marina felt her legs tremble, her stomach churn, but something inside her refused to crumble right then and there. She quietly closed the door, walked down the stairs of the hotel, and got into her car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. The tears fell, but along with them something new was born, something she had never felt before with such intensity, the fury of someone who had been underestimated for too long. Marina drove aimlessly through the city, remembering every sacrifice she had made for that marriage. She had abandoned her own promising career as a corporate lawyer to care for her children and support Eduardo in building his company, TechVision, a technology startup now worth millions. While he received the plaudits and appeared in business magazines as the brilliant young entrepreneur, Marina was merely the devoted wife behind the scenes. She organized dinners with investors, took care of every detail of family life so he could dedicate himself entirely to the business. Reviewed contracts late at night when he needed help, all while raising their 2 children alone. And now she discovered that while she was building her castle, he was already living in another with the woman she considered a sister. When Marina finally got home, it was already 3 in the morning. She couldn't stop crying, but she also couldn't stop thinking. She looked at the photos on the living room wall, that luxurious apartment Eduardo had bought the year before, saying it was to celebrate their success, but what she now realized was just another way to compensate for his guilt. Every painting, every piece of furniture, every detail of that perfect life they portrayed on social media was a sham. Marina grabbed her phone and began scrolling through the old photos, seeing herself 10 years younger, with that sparkle in her eyes of someone who still believed in fairy tales. Where was that woman? When had she lost her way? It was then that she realized she hadn't been lost. She had been slowly erased, day after day, until she became invisible even to herself. The next morning, Eduardo arrived home as if nothing had happened, with that fake smile and the automatic kiss on her forehead. Marina felt nauseous, but controlled. Herself. She said nothing, simply asked if he wanted coffee. He found her silence strange, but he was too accustomed to his own arrogance to imagine she knew anything. Over the next few weeks, Marina took action. She didn't just want a divorce, she wanted justice. She began discreetly investigating the company's finances, using her legal knowledge, which was rusty but not dead. She discovered that Eduardo had committed several tax irregularities, that he had embezzled funds, and that the company, despite appearing prosperous, was actually on the verge of a serious financial crisis due to his mismanagement. Most importantly, Marina discovered that she was entitled to 50% of everything, since they had married in full community property, and she had contributed significantly to the start of the business, albeit informally. Marina sought out a lawyer specializing in business law, someone Eduardo didn't know. She devised a meticulous strategy, while Eduardo continued his double life, dining with Lívia in expensive restaurants and returning home pretending to be the perfect husband. Marina was behind the scenes orchestrating the biggest checkmate of his life. She contacted disgruntled investors, gathered evidence of every irregularity, documented every lie. She also discovered that Lívia wasn't the first, that there had been others over the years, that betrayal was practically a way of life for Eduardo. Each new discovery stung like a knife, but it also fueled the fire growing inside her. The turning point came when Marina discovered that TechVision was negotiating a merger with a larger company, a deal that would make Eduardo a millionaire once and for all. It was now or never. Marina put her plan into action. First, she strategically filed for divorce, freezing all the couple's assets. Eduardo was shocked when he received the papers at the office in front of his employees. He tried calling Marina dozens of times, but she didn't answer. When he finally reached her, he was met with a coldness he had never seen from her. Marina simply said she knew everything about Lívia, about the others, about every land that he would pay for every single one. Eduardo, accustomed to controlling everything, realized for the first time that he had completely underestimated the woman he had married. But Marina didn't stop there. Using her share of the property division and a loan she secured based on her professional qualifications and the value of the assets, she did something no one expected. She bought out the shares of TechVision's minority shareholders who were unhappy with Eduardo within weeks. Through impeccable legal maneuvering and using inside information she had gathered over her years living with Eduardo, Marina became the company's majority shareholder. She called a special board meeting and in front of Eduardo and all the executives presented evidence of his financial irregularities and proposed his removal as CEO. The vote was unanimous. Eduardo was devastated, humiliated, and lost. For the first time in his life, he had no control over anything. Marina didn't feel the pleasure she imagined she would in that moment. She felt justice. She felt she was regaining her dignity, but she also felt a huge void, because as much as Eduardo deserved all of it, she still had to deal with the pain of being betrayed, of wasting 15 years of her life, of believing in someone who never deserved her. The nights were the worst. When she came home and her children were already asleep and she was alone with her thoughts. She had won the battle, but she hadn't yet won the internal war. The one that rages inside you when you realize you have to rebuild your life from scratch at 40 years old. Taking over TechVision wasn't easy. Marina had to prove to every employee, every investor, every client that she wasn't just the vengeful ex-wife, but a competent professional who had abandoned a brilliant career and was now back with a vengeance. The first few months were brutal. She studied until the wee hours of the morning, relearning everything about technology and business management. She hired a trustworthy team, people who saw her not as a victim of betrayal, but as the strong leader she was becoming. Slowly, the company began to stabilize. Marina discovered Eduardo's misdeeds and corrected everything, renegotiated damaging contracts, and brought in new investors. Within 6 months, TechVision was more profitable and organized than it had ever been under Eduardo's leadership. Eduardo, meanwhile, was in free fall. He tried to start a new business, but his reputation was destroyed after the irregularities came to light. Lívia abandoned him as soon as she realized he no longer had money or status, proving that their relationship had never been about love, but rather convenience and opportunism. He tried a few times to reach out to Marina, asking for forgiveness, telling her he'd been an idiot, but she wouldn't listen. It wasn't about hate. She simply no longer had room in her life for someone who had treated her as invisible for so long. Marina was too busy rebuilding not just a company, but rebuilding herself, piece by piece. Marina's transformation was impressive, not only professionally, but personally. She started taking care of herself again, not to prove anything to anyone, but because she was finally seeing herself again. She began therapy to process the pain of the betrayal and learn to trust again, both in others and in herself. Her children, who initially suffered greatly from the separation, began to see in their mother an example of strength and resilience. She was honest with them about what had happened in an age-appropriate way, and taught them that sometimes the people we love disappoint us, but that doesn't mean we should give up on believing in love or in ourselves. A year after taking over TechVision, Marina was at a technology conference in São Paulo when she met Ricardo, a businessman in the renewable energy sector. They began talking about a possible partnership between their companies. And Marina realized that for the first time in years, she was genuinely interested in someone. It wasn't a desperate crush or a need to fill a void. It was something more mature, more conscious. Ricardo was also divorced, had his own scars, and understood the importance of building something based on respect and transparency. They began meeting first as business partners, then as friends, and eventually as something more. Marina was scared. She couldn't deny it. The idea of opening up to someone again, of trusting, of allowing herself to be vulnerable, all of it terrified her. But she had also learned that she couldn't let the fear of getting hurt again stop her from living fully. One night, during a dinner where Ricardo had prepared Italian food at his house, she finally opened up about everything she'd been through. She talked about the betrayal, the revenge, how she'd bought Eduardo's company and ousted him, about how she was still trying to understand who she was after so long being defined only as a wife and mother. Ricardo listened in silence, and when she finished, he simply held her hand and said he thought she was the bravest woman he'd ever met, and that he was willing to go at her pace without pressure, just discovering together what that could be. 2 years after discovering her betrayal, Marina was in a completely different place than the woman who had entered that hotel room. TechVision had tripled in value under her management, and she was recognized as one of the most influential businesswomen in the country. She had received offers to buy the company for absurd sums, but decided to retain control because it represented much more than money to her. It represented her own reconstruction, proof that she was capable of not only surviving, but thriving. Eduardo had moved to another city, trying to start over far from the public failure that his life had become. Marina no longer felt anger toward him, only a healthy indifference, as if he were someone she had known in another life. The relationship with Ricardo had evolved into something solid and genuine. They weren't living together yet, both were cautious and wanted to do things in their own time. But there was a real commitment between them. Ricardo knew Marina's children, and they liked him, not as an attempt to replace their father, but as someone who genuinely cared about them and their mother. Marina had learned that love wasn't about grand romantic gestures or eternal promises, but about consistency, respect, and choosing to be by someone's side every day. It was about being seen, heard, and valued, and she finally had that. Marina had also reconnected with herself in ways she never imagined possible. She returned to painting, a hobby she had abandoned years ago. She began traveling with her true friends she had made in this new phase of her life, women who supported her and celebrated her victories. She established healthy boundaries in all aspects of her life, something she had never done before because she had always put everyone else's needs above her own. Now, she understood that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was a necessity. She couldn't care for her children, run her business, or be present in a relationship if she wasn't whole, if she wasn't well with herself first. Marina's story spread, not because she wanted publicity, but because it was impossible to hide such a radical transformation. Business magazines wanted to interview her. Television programs wanted to meet the woman who had made such a spectacular comeback. Marina accepted some of these opportunities because she understood that her story could inspire other women going through similar situations. Women who felt their lives were over after betrayal or who had lost their identity in relationships. She wanted them to know that it was possible to rebuild, that it was possible not only to survive, but to create a life even better than the one before. During one of these interviews, the reporter asked Marina if she didn't think she'd been too vindictive, if buying the company and removing Eduardo from it hadn't been excessive. Marina thought for a moment before answering. She said she didn't see it as revenge, but as justice. Eduardo had built that empire on her back, using her sacrifices, her dedication, her support, and then he had discarded her as if she were disposable. Taking control of the company wasn't about destroying him. It was about reclaiming what should have always been half hers from the start. It was about showing herself and the world that she wasn't the passive victim everyone expected her to be. It was about choosing to fight for herself when no one else was fighting for her. The interview went viral. Thousands of women contacted Marina, sharing their own stories of betrayal, difficult new beginnings, and how they were trying to find themselves again after years of abusive or neglectful relationships. Marina realized there was something bigger going on, that her story had the power to touch people she never imagined it would. She decided to use her platform to create something meaningful. With the help of Ricardo and a dedicated team, Marina founded an institute that offered legal, psychological, and professional support to women leaving destructive relationships and needing help, rebuilding their lives. It was her way of transforming the pain she had felt into something that could make a difference in the world. The institute grew rapidly. Marina invested a significant portion of TechVision's profits in this project and secured partnerships with other companies and organizations. They offered everything from free legal consultations to job placement programs, subsidized therapy, and even microcredit for women who wanted to start their own businesses but lacked seed capital. Seeing these women flourish, regain their self-esteem, and rebuild their lives was more rewarding to Marina than any business success she had achieved. It was proof that it was possible to transform pain into purpose, suffering into strength. Meanwhile, Eduardo tried a few times to reach out, not to Marina, but to his children, asking them to intercede on his behalf, saying he was sorry and wanted a chance to at least rebuild his relationship with them. The children, now teenagers and much more understanding of what had happened, had conflicting feelings. Marina never stopped them from having a relationship with their father, even after everything. She understood that as terrible a husband as Eduardo had been, that didn't completely erase the fact that he was their father. She simply made it clear that their relationship with their father was theirs to decide, that she would respect whatever choice they made, but that Eduardo would have to earn their trust again through actions, not empty words. Marina also had to deal with the emotional aftermath of the betrayal in unexpected ways. There were times when she woke up in the middle of the night with anxiety attacks, reliving that moment in the hotel. There were days when she doubted herself, when her inner critic told her that maybe if she had been different, better, more interesting, Eduardo wouldn't have cheated. Therapy was crucial for her to understand that the betrayal was never about her, but about Eduardo's selfish choices. He didn't cheat because she wasn't enough. He cheated because he wasn't enough, because he had internal voids he tried to fill in destructive ways. Understanding this was liberating for Marina. Over time, Marina also learned to forgive, not necessarily Eduardo, but herself. She forgave herself for being naive, for ignoring signs that in retrospect were obvious, for losing herself in the relationship. She understood that forgiveness isn't about saying everything's fine or forgetting what happened, but about freeing herself from the burden of carrying that pain and anger forever. She decided she would no longer give Eduardo the power to control her emotions or her well-being. Her life was now about her, her children, the people she loved and who truly loved her, and the dreams she was realizing. 3.5 years after discovering her betrayal, Marina sat in the TechVision office, looking out the window at the city below. Ricardo stood beside her, showing her the plans for a new joint project between their companies. Her children were doing well. One was about to enter university, and the other was in high school, both proud of their mother. The institute she had founded was helping hundreds of women rebuild their lives. The company was more prosperous than ever, and Marina was happy, not the superficial kind of fairy tale happiness, but a real happiness, achieved through hard work, therapy, tears, and courage. Marina reflected on the entire journey. She had traveled since that fateful night in the hotel. If anyone had told her at that moment that in a few years she would be where she was now, she never would have believed it. The pain had been immense, overwhelming, almost unbearable at times. But from that pain had been born a version of herself that was stronger, more aware, more whole than she had ever been. She wasn't grateful for the betrayal because it had been cruel and unnecessary, but she was grateful for the woman she had become. Through the process of healing and rebuilding, Marina's story isn't about perfect revenge or destroying those who hurt her, even if it seemed that way at first. It's about a woman who refused to be defined by the worst thing that happened to her, who chose to use that experience as fuel to become who she always had the potential to be. It's about transforming the role of victim into the protagonist of her own story. It's about understanding that happiness isn't a destination you reach, but a journey you build every day through conscious choices, healthy boundaries, and unwavering. And if you're going through something similar right now, if your world has recently fallen apart, or if you're in that dark place Marina found herself in that night, know that you too can rebuild. It may seem impossible now, the pain may seem eternal, but I promise that with time, professional help, and a lot of courage, you can create a life that's not just good, but extraordinary. Don't let someone's betrayal define your worth or your future. You are so much more than the worst day of your life. And if this story touched your heart, if you identified with Marina Burr or know someone going through something similar, be sure to follow our channel. Here we share real stories of people who overcame unimaginable difficulties, who transformed pain into purpose, who rebuilt themselves when all seemed lost. Because we all deserve happy endings, but the best happy endings are the ones we write for ourselves. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this story with someone who needs to hear that starting over is possible, that happiness can be regained, and that no one has the power to dim your shine unless you allow it.